First, as I said, a huge change in politics today for both the two big Conservative parties. A new leadership team for both the Liberals and the Nationals at party room meetings today.
I'm proud to announce that Peter Dutton has been elected unopposed as leader of the Parliamentary Liberal Party, along with Susan Lee as the deputy.
The member for Maranoa, David Littleproud, is the leader of the Nationals, and Senator Perrin Davey from New South Wales is the deputy leader.
Now, before we look at what all this means for the Liberals to switch to Peter Dutton and Susan Lee, and for the Nationals to replace Barnaby Joyce with David Littleproud and Perrin Davey, let's look at the context. Context is all. Now, this country, with its new Labor government, is going to get a big shock. Supermarket prices going up, interest rates going up, your electricity bills going up already, petrol up, our massive deficit up. But our growth, pathetic. Now, Labor knows all this, and just 1 week into government is already backing off the promises it recklessly made before the election. You might even feel you were lied to, given that Labor leader Anthony Albanese 2 weeks ago made this fake promise.
You said you don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
But now that Albanese is Prime Minister, he has in fact absolutely refused to explicitly back a 5.1% hike to the minimum wage in his government submission last week to the umpire, Fair Work Australia. And how could he? He knows now, like he knew before the election, that this country faces a financial crunch, maybe even a recession. And Labor cannot now risk setting off a wage price spiral. You know how that works. Wage rise causes a price rise, causes a wage rise, and on and on. Now, yesterday, Labor prepared yet another backtrack. 2 weeks before Election Day, Albanese again falsely claimed the Liberals had cut spending to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, when in fact its massive budget has exploded. And he promised more spending. In fact, all up, Labor would spend $8 billion more than the Liberals.
You cannot have a clearer answer than that Labor is putting additional funding into health, education and the NDIS.
But yesterday, how times changed, as Finance Minister Katie Gallagher prepared the ground for spending cuts.
There is a range of spending that we're having a look at in the budget, and there's also some huge budget pressures coming. So, you know, I guess in those areas, health, aged care, the NDIS, defence, national security, where there are all of them growing faster than GDP and going to place significant pressure on the budget going forward.
Now, Labor can't pretend the economy is suddenly worse than it thought a week ago, just before the election, because the Charter of Budget Honesty stops governments from cooking the books before an election. The truth is that Labor simply conned voters by making promises it knew it could never keep. And now comes the rowback. In fact, my tip is that times will get so tough that Labor is going to have to think twice, even about its global warming promises. Because does it really want to kill even more coal-fired power stations when we're already so short of electricity, prices going through the roof? So this is the context. This is the context where the Liberals and the Nationals changed their leaders today. Did they make the right choices? Have those new leaders already said the right things? Well, let's start with former Defence Minister Peter Dutton, elected unopposed by the Liberals, along with Deputy Susan Lee. Now, this part of Dutton's pitch today was, I think, perfect, given the kinds of things I've said are coming. As I've said before, the Liberals have got to now be the party of the battlers and, for heaven's sake, also stand for something.
We live in the best country in the world. I want our country to support aspiration and to reward hard work, to take proper care of those Australians who short-term or long-term can't take care of themselves. We have a rich and proud Indigenous heritage and a migrant story, the envy of the world. We're aligned with countries of similar values. We always have been, and that alliance, as we know, is more important than ever. Our strength to the Australian people is as the best party to keep our country safe and to keep our economy strong so that we can afford to pay for the essential services. By the time of the next election in 2025, we will have presented a plan to the Australian people which will clean up Labor's inevitable mess and lay out our own vision. We won't be Labor light. We'll propose strong policy to make the lives of Australians better and to provide more security to them. Our policies will be squarely aimed at the forgotten Australians in the suburbs across regional Australia, the families and small businesses whose lot the Labor Party will have made more difficult. Under my leadership, the Liberal Party will be true to our values that have seen us win successive elections over the course of the last quarter of a century.
Now, rhetoric is of course cheap. It's easy. What about policies? What about global warming, this mad end-of-the-world religion that's threatening to turn off our lights, and that some Liberals say, well, that cost us the election, that we didn't take this seriously enough. Now, personally, I would love Peter Dutton to fight back against the insane exaggerations, scaremongering, but I don't think that was ever likely given the hysteria out there, especially in the media. Plus the fact, of course, that too many Liberal MPs have drunk the Kool-Aid. So what Dutton said today might be the best answer we could expect for now. I think he's buying the Liberals some time until Labor's climate policies really hurt.
In terms of policy on climate, I'm a very passionate believer in making sure that we have the appropriate response to the issue of our emissions reductions. We need to do it in a sensible way. People will see an increase in electricity bills under Labor. Let's be very clear about that. Electricity prices under Labor will go up. And we have to have policies that help us meet our international obligations, which of course we will. We have to be responsible domestically in our own policy settings. And we have to be very mindful that people can afford in what will be a very difficult couple of years under Labor. And it's not just petrol and electricity, but there are other costs of living will go up as well. And so we'll have policies, we'll support policies which aren't going to turn lights off in small businesses, aren't going to send families broke in the suburbs because they can't afford Labor's power bill.
Okay, but there is in fact one last policy question that I think is huge. And really the consequence is even more dangerous than global warming, believe it or not. It's this plan by Labor to divide us by race in the Constitution, to create a kind of advisory parliament just for Aborigines that it calls The Voice. Now, I think this is racist. I think this is going to fundamentally shape our Australia. It can only lead to more race resentment. And philosophically, it's an insult to our common humanity, and it is completely against the great Liberal idea that we are all individuals. We can't be divided into members of some tribal collective. And here I do wish that Peter Dutton had not sounded ready to compromise on that fundamental principle, although he did make clear that Labor's plan will do nothing to actually make many Aboriginal lives better.
I want the symbolic nature, which I accept is very important to many people, to be accompanied by practical responses. I want to understand how we're going to reduce the incidence of child abuse within those communities. I want to understand how it is that we're going to allow more young girls to go on to education, how we can address infant mortality and many other indicators. And as I say, it's not been from a bad place, but we've failed in this policy area, and nobody hand on heart can sit here today and say that we are in a better position in many of those instances, many of those indicators, than we were 5 or 10 or 25 years ago.
Now, this is such an important issue. Liberals must be against this apartheid, this racial division. It's so important that I just wish Dutton had said a clear no. Nevertheless, I think it's a great start for Peter Dutton today in selling himself. And he is very clearly going to give Labor a big fight on exactly its biggest weaknesses. And by the way, on the journey, he's going to give the ABC a fight as well.
People on the ground can see in a more wholesome way who I am. Hopefully you could tell a different story, that I'm not as bad as the ABC sometimes might report. But the ABC always brings a smile to my face.
But on the new Nationals leader, I'm afraid to say I'm not yet convinced. Lots of talk today from David LittleProud about making the Nationals the voice of common sense. But I'm not sure his idea of common sense is necessarily mine. because there was also lots of talk about going along with the climate scare and just making sure that country people aren't hurt and that, you know, going net zero, that's the sensible centre. Well, by the way, David Littleproud, this scare is hurting us all, country people and city. And there was, of course, lots of sucking up to the new identity politics to fix the supposed women problem of the coalition.
So to Perrin Davies as my new deputy, and to Bridget McKenzie, who has been there from the start, as our leader in the Senate. There's two women standing behind me that are powerful and strong, and there's a woman standing behind Peter Dutton. The diversity of our room means that we can draw not only on men, but we can draw on the strength of these women that bring the experience of the regions together. This is about us as a party moving forward, not lurching to the left, not lurching to the right, but bringing this thing called common sense to Canberra.
Really, you know, if they're really such powerful and strong women, David Littleproud, why are you the leader and not them? You know, women across Australia must be so sick of this sort of con, you know, when they see a leader, a man, telling them, oh, women are really important in my party because look, behind me, my junior here is a woman. You know, the Nationals have just done this. The Liberals have done this. Even the Greens have done this. Labor frontman. Oh, but look, there's a woman, my deputy. The only exception in the big parties is Labor. Male Prime Minister, male Deputy Prime Minister. But do you think the feminist lobby is now going to switch from savaging the Liberals for their supposed women problem to kicking Labor for a change? No way. It's about power, not principle. But I can only hope that the Liberals remember their principles. And with Peter Dutton in charge, I think there is now a good chance.